recording later.
Sounds
Yeah.
good.
Great.
Fantastic.
Bye.
Nice to meet you. Yeah, so again, I'm Lindsay Oluyede. I'm a PhD student in the Department of City and Regional Planning at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And so I actually initially, in undergrad, I majored in environmental studies and I wanted to be a professional environmentalist. And so I did that for a while. I worked at American Rivers actually and worked on water issues for the first 5 years of my career. But I became exposed to urban planning as, a way to really influence the built environment. And so I then pivoted to the planning profession and have worked as a transportation planner. I did some trail development work with Rails to Trails Conservancy that I mentioned earlier. And from there, went on to start working on my PhD. So now I'm working on my dissertation, which is looking at the application of design thinking in the planning field to address local and regional transportation issues. And so in this context, design thinking, is this kind of stepwise, iterative process for developing innovative solutions. It starts with empathizing and really understanding user needs first, and then using that information to, throughout the rest of the process to define and frame your problem, to ideate, to develop prototypes, and to test and refine those solutions. So I'll just use my time today to give an overview of this topic, and I've summarized it in this infographic on the mural board. So first, in the first top blue box, I thought it might be helpful just to kind of, let's step back and think about traditional transportation planning processes and how they work. So typically planners identify projects and policies to improve transportation challenges, and input is given from the public in a few ways typically, either through public hearings and open houses, which are very formal meetings where individuals attend and kind of can give their input on a proposal. There's review and comment periods where there's a period of time where the public can read through the proposals and plans and submit comments. This typically happens online these days. And with public hearings and review and comment periods, these are done to meet federal requirements for community engagement. But a lot of times the planners are saying, here's what we've come up with, right? What do you think? And so often the proposed ideas really don't change very much, regardless of the input that they get from the public. And so another method is citizen advisory boards, which I think are a little more participatory, but and this is when members of the public serve on boards that provide input to decision makers. But a lot of times these boards aren't representative and they're missing key voices particularly from low-income communities and communities of color. So then moving on to the first gray box, there are limitations of only using quantitative data as well in the planning process. These statistics and numbers, don't really capture people's everyday lived experiences. And so these stories and narratives really help illuminate the patterns and trends that we see in the data. And I think are a very important component of engagement and the planning and, an important planning input into the process as well. So down to the next blue box. So the focus of my dissertation research is learning what design thinking can bring to the table. The application of design thinking in the transportation field is really an emerging practice, and Monica and Jim are one of the early adopters, along with a few other organizations across the country. And so my preliminary hypothesis is I think that design thinking really does hold potential. It has been used in other fields to help facilitate more diverse and inclusive public engagement, like for example, in the public health field. And so I'll be studying, the work of the Pontiac incubator, and I'm also looking at some local and regional organizations on the West Coast and elsewhere. And I really want to learn, how they're applying design thinking to address transportation issues, to inform transportation decisions. What are those outcomes of using this approach and how they can be assessed? And so, in the final gray box, just to kind of tie back to one of the themes of today's sessions, I think that the essence of design thinking is that it causes us to think big, the world is very diverse and complex, as we all know, and taking a more human-centered approach, I think, really challenges us to step outside of our own individual lives and acknowledge that not every person's transportation experience or lived experience more broadly is like our own. And there might be a better solution out there than what might seem so obvious to us. And so I love, Ryan, your example about the Kid Mayor program. And like we said, I think that's fantastic. You know, kids aren't jaded like we adults tend to be, and they really do think big and think expansively. And I think that's a great way to get them involved. And so, yeah, I think, you know, by empathizing with others, we can be better equipped with coming up with solutions for more sustainable transportation systems and more sustainable communities more broadly. So I just wanted to end with this quote from Anita Cozart, and she is currently the Deputy Director of Community Planning and Design at the District of Columbia. And she previously worked at PolicyLink, which you all might be familiar with. It's a national think tank. And so I think this quote from her just really eloquently makes the case for a design thinking approach. And so she says, when you have low income and communities of color at the table, solving some of the problems that exist, you're going to get better solutions because they know what trip they're not taking. There's no data that's going to tell you the trip that they're not taking to the doctor. And so you have to hear that from the wisdom and the insights of people who are struggling in these situations. And when they're at the table to help solve those solutions, they're giving the inputs that are the true ones and help us come up with the right solution. So with that, I'll turn it over to Monica.
That is so awesome. So we've done a lot of, what do you think, what's the state of the transportation sector right now, Lindsay? There's a lot of federal dollars coming through the American Rescue Plan and infrastructure.
Right.
Is that going to help with the drop of ridership? What's the impact of technology and learn from home?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the landscape will totally change. You know, obviously, so much of our infrastructure is outdated. You know, I think that the bridges the American Society of Civil Engineers has poorly graded our bridges for decades now, and there's so many of the interstate highway structures that were built in the 50s and 60s are now coming to their useful life. And so I think we're going to see this big reimagining of our transportation system. I think we acknowledge the harms that dividing communities played, you know, in building out these large highway systems. And we obviously, you know, with climate change, we need to think about creating more sustainable transportation systems and offering, you know, more carbon friendly options, and to reduce single occupancy vehicle driving and commuting. And so then the pandemic threw a wrench into all of this too. And it'll be interesting to see, you know, as Jen mentioned, you know, will teleworking remain, you know, after the pandemic eases? I think that there's a lot of potential there too. But another interesting thing that happened during the pandemic was a lot of tactical urbanism, where people really, you know, we just very quickly reworked our streets. You know, that in a lot of communities, they reduced the number of lanes available to car traffic and either added bike lanes or were expanding sidewalks so that then retailers and restaurants could do outdoor seating and outdoor shopping. And so you just saw this kind of shifting of space away from cars to people and pedestrians and bikes. And I think inadvertently, it really showed us what's possible and how to think big and how to think visionary. And it was this great way to kind of test some of these prototype, essentially, you know, like a design thinking process, prototype and refine these interventions. And so I think in the next, you know, the coming years, I think the transportation landscape could be totally shaken up. It'll be really interesting to see what happens.
You know, it's funny, Lindsay, I was just like last week in a conversation about the Phoenix Center, and I said, why don't we just close Saginaw Street completely. Turned the
Yeah.
whole thing into a walking street,
Interesting
and
and
all the whole, and then the Phoenix Center can actually shine, right? And be the thing that it could be. Yeah, wouldn't that be beautiful?
Absolutely.
That'd
be great.
Yeah, it's so much
Great.
smarter than trying to fix, they're talking about fixing the drive-through underneath and all that. It's like, no. Make
No.
one big loop on the outside. And the question of what to do with the parking lot is let people park their cars there so they can get out and walk, right? I mean, just you need a place to park, and then get out of your car because everything else is walking.
Right.
Yes.
It would be
Yes.
beautiful. It would be a beautiful thing. I know. I actually, because the unrolling of the loop project is, keeps coming. I've been dragged into some of those conversations,
It's bad.
and I know it is. And that was my answer. Actually, why don't we? It's been a while since that conversation started. Why don't we look at it differently now?
Yeah.
It's been at least 10 years. So let's think about another solution. We don't have to do the thing now that we know we have some money. Why don't we do something? At least think about something different. But we seem to be stuck. So
Something smart versus
Yeah.
just
Something-
doing something to do something.
exactly. I mean, there's that. It was my idea 8 years ago. Therefore, we should keep going on it.
The false
Yeah.
premise was people couldn't find Pontiac. I always found that somewhat suspect. Okay.
No, the problem is there's not enough interesting reasons to come
There
to
we go.
downtown.
Yeah.
So make it fun and interesting to come downtown,
They always do everything backwards. They always want to do the physical, like redo the loop rather than just doing what you have said. And when they wanted to demolish the Phoenix Center, it was so that cars could come streaming through our little 6-block walkable
Right.
downtown that could be a super block if we're thinking about Barcelona and what places like that are doing. I'm not sure if Ryan's on right now, but that's they're doing a lot around looking at Barcelona super blocks, and we have the perfect infrastructure as is, but we have to do community engagement. We have to bring our community to our downtown and make a reason for them to come.
Right. I mean, I'm sure you all have been in Ann Arbor. I mean, there's some people just go there because you do. You get out of your car, you walk around, you see people. It's like being in Italy. It's like being in, it's what you do.
That's
Yeah.
what I remember about Pontiac when it was successful.
Yeah. That was the place, that was the city I used to come to as a young adult. And